Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today and welcome to this webinar which is part of our Bullhorn Basics series. So today it is Mastering Contractor Management and Reporting with Bullhorn Analytics. Obviously we must start with some housekeeping. So just so you know, the webinar will be recorded and the recording will be shared with you afterwards and made available. So if you need to drop out, no problem, you're going to get the recording anyway. Audience microphones will be muted during the session, but we have got a Q&A feature in the Zoom and we've got some time at the end to answer any questions. So please drop anything in that you'd like to discuss. So my name's Zelda. I'm a senior CSM for Bullhorn Analytics. And I'm joined today by my lovely colleague, Kat, who will be supporting us in the Q&A. Kat is also customer success for Bullhorn Analytics based in the US, whereas you may be able to tell that I'm based in the UK. So, to give you just a bit of information about myself, I've worked in Bullhorn Analytics since prior to the acquisition. So I was part of the Cube19 team that is the product that became the Bullhorn Analytics we all know and love. So I've been doing this job for just over 7 years now. But prior to that, I had a lengthy life in recruitment and specifically contract recruitment. Hence why I wanted to cover this topic today. I never had a tool like Bullhorn Analytics when I was working in recruitment. But of course, there have been so many times when I thought if I'd had that tool, this is how I would have used it. You know, I was a pretty, I'd like to think pretty good contract recruiter. So I, in my best year, I was running at about 75 contractors out and I was billing in the region of $1 million US. So hopefully I've got some wisdom and some ideas to share with you all. Oh, before we start actually on today's topics, let's just get through all the disclaimers. So firstly, terminology. Obviously, we've got customers from the US and the UK here. So I'm going to talk a lot about contract GM or gross margin, or for my UK and EMEA friends, this is the same as gross profit. And I'm probably going to end up using them slightly interchangeably, but they are the same thing. The difference between what you pay the contractor and what you charge the client, so what the money that you as a recruitment agency are going to make. Also, a lot of the time, I'm going to mention about how certain things are set up and certain metrics. And of course, I'm referring to everything that's in the default setting. So if you think, oh, I don't think that's how my company does it, and you're an enterprise customer, it could be that you've been configured differently during your implementation. If you want to check, for example, maybe the person who did your implementation is no longer with your business, please raise a support ticket and just ask an analyst, could I double check how my contract metrics are configured? And finally, we are, of course, using demo data, which is always a bit odd and never behaves quite as nicely as proper customer data. So hopefully, if you see anything that looks a bit odd that I'm going to show you today, if you go and look at it in your own account afterwards, you'll find that it's a lot more kind of behaves a lot more like how you would expect. Most of the things we're going to cover, well, everything we're going to cover is available to enterprise analytics customers, but there are some things that are also available to our growth and starter customers as well. So I'll mention what those are. So for those on growth or starter, you can see the kind of enhancements you get if you have the enterprise package. So just to reconfirm what we're going to cover today. So we're going to go through what financial metrics related to contract gross margin are available as standard within Analytics Enterprise, and what the use cases are for these metrics. We'll also look at what options are available within Analytics so that your contract gross margin metrics better reflect your likely invoice values without changing any fields in your ATS. We've then got a section which is how to use the fields in your ATS to further enhance those contract projections. And that will also cover options for capturing additional payroll costs if you've got additional costs that you want to make sure are taken off your margin. And then finally, we've got some time at the end for a Q&A. So allow me to jump into a system, an analytics system. And I'm going to go to my friend Erica. And we're going to start with the most fundamental of all contract metrics, contract sales. If we go down here, we have contract sales, and Erica's having a pretty good month contract sales wise because she's got $63,000 in there. Let me explain how contract sales works. So it is what I would think of as the forward value of the contract, as in When you write the contract, as in put it on the system, it's going to take all the working days between your start date and your end date. And by working days, I mean Monday to Friday. So it's not going to take into account public holidays in different parts of the world. It's going to just do everything based on Monday to Friday. It will take into account of obviously the payment unit. So, you know, whether you're paying that contractor monthly, weekly, daily, or hourly. And of course, it's going to take the difference between the charge rate and the pay rate, and then tie it all up. We'll kind of multiply it all together in one metric. And then the number that the user will see here will generally be their percentage of the commission split. So I know with this particular contract deal, it's only actually one deal, demo data, it was a cracking deal. This was actually a 50-50 split with another person. So there's another person on the team that has also got $63,000 in this particular metric for this month. So full disclosure, when I started working at Cube 19 and having been a contract recruiter for a long time, I didn't totally get this metric because I always thought, well, but we don't really know what's going to happen. You know, often we might place someone and then, you know, so often, unfortunately, don't make it to the end of term, or the project finishes early, or even better, the project's extended. You know, it's for us to assume the contract value will be that enormous amount based on the start date and end date is maybe a touch ambitious. But I must admit that over time, I have come to understand how this metric should be used. And what I've realized is that what this is really good for is incentivizing your staff to write good business. And what's good business? Well, the way you make deals that have a higher value in contract sales is they have to be longer, so their start date and their end date have to be further apart, or their margin has to be better. Plus, contract sales is only picking up new placements, so it's not extensions at existing contracts. And to me, those are three really fundamental behaviors that you want to encourage contract recruiters to do. So I wouldn't necessarily consider this like, you know, the be all and end all. This tells you everything about the value of your contract book. But I do think it's really, really useful to incentivize, encourage, and reward your consultants for doing the right behaviors in regard to making contract placements. This metric, contract sales, is available on all editions. So hopefully everyone on this call has that metric. It has like a baby brother, contract starter sales, which is exactly the same, except it just does it rolled into the date the contract starts, as opposed to when the contract is added to the system. But there are plenty of other options. So I think that maybe what I've learned over my time is that many people kind of start and stop with that. But the reality is that's just one of the many ways of looking at contract finances in analytics. So let me show you another example of a really handy contract metric that's really good for OneView for end users. So we've got this one here, projected GP selected timeframe. Now what this is doing is it's taking the projected GP, i.e. you know, the difference between charge rate and pay rate for all the contractors working for Erica for whatever period we're looking at, i.e. this should be approximately what Erica will bill this month. It's going to be taking into consideration, say you've got a contractor on the system who finishes halfway through May, it's only going to be taking half their GP. If you've got a contractor who hasn't started yet, but they're starting the last week of May, it will be taking 1 week's worth of their GP. So I absolutely acknowledge that it's very unlikely to be perfect, but it is encouraging people, you know, to consider the value of their book and how they're always growing the value of their book. Plus, as a recruiter, for me, it would have been quite nice to know this is approximately like what I might bill and therefore approximately what I might get paid. And this is really good on OneView. And you know, so we're going to go through lots of different metrics, and some of them are, you know, the use cases for them are better in different parts of the system, but this is particularly good on OneView. Another thing about projected GP is it doesn't care whether any contractor it's looking at is an original or an extension. It's just every contractor working that's attributed to Erica. So, you know, it's a slightly different way of looking at the book, but to me, it's a bit more how my old company used to consider contract revenue. We've then got current contractors weekly GP, and you'll see that's quite a lot lower. This is a live metric, meaning we can change the time frame and it's always going to show us the value for right now. And this will be showing, again, all the contractors working for Erica right now. What is the sum of their total of their weekly GP? So it doesn't matter that we're on a month, it's only ever going to show a weekly GP amount. So this, it can be useful for someone to have on one view. You know, it's kind of like nice to know how much my runners are worth, my weekly GP for my runners that I've got working right now. For incentivizing or reporting, that's really not its primary purpose. Obviously, you increase your current contractor weekly GP by writing new business, contract sales, and extending contractors, which we'll get onto later. Now we've got this one, new weekly GP or new weekly GM. So this, I think, is a massively underutilized metric because it kind of, to me, it kind of skirts the difference between contract sales, which isn't perfect for certain cases, and projected GP, which is picking up extensions as well as new business when we're often wanting to encourage new business. So this is the weekly GP value of all contracts, new contract placements added to the system in the time frame, but only ever their weekly GP value. So you're only ever, even if you write a deal for like 12 months, whereas in contract sales, you'd have an entire 12 months worth of GP coming into your contract sales metric. This metric's always going to cap it out at 1 week's worth of GP. So this is potentially a good way of incentivizing, or, you know, metric to use to incentivize and encourage people to be writing new business that's worth more by having better margins, but not potentially over kind of rewarding them, because actually, you know, signing a really long deal is great, but, you know, we don't know if the person's really going to work all that time or not. So that's a good one that I think it should be considered. Then we have got this next one here, this contractors out in period weekly GP, and you'll see that it's actually a very similar number to current contractors out. This can be used in one view, but this is the kind of metric which has really good use cases in other parts of the system. So we are going to jump in to how I like to use this metric. Let me just get another tab up. So this one we're going to look at in Trends. Trends is an enterprise feature available to enterprise analytics customers. You may be aware there's also a trend tile in dashboards that behaves in very much the same way. But for this particular thing, I'm going to show you Trends because Trends has got more options in terms of the graphics and making it look nice than the dashboard's trend at this moment in time. So if I go into Trends, here's one I prepared earlier. What this is using my contractors out in period weekly GP metric. I'm on this year, so each dot is a week of this year, and I've got 3 different users plotted together. So I've got Erica in green, Matt in pink, and Ahad in orange. Now, allow me to draw your attention to the fact that right now we are approximately between this and these 2 dots. What I love about this metric and why I love doing it as a trend is you can use it to look backwards, like what your book was worth at any point in the past, but also crucially, you can use it to look forwards. So we can see that Ahad had an absolutely cracking start to the year. In fact, I'm going to turn off Matt and Erica just to make it even more clear. So, you know, he started the year with his book worth about 2.5K a week. Had a few weeks like that, and then he's clearly done some cracking deals because his book's gone up to about 17.5K value back in, looks like early March. And obviously then, I mean, this maybe is one or multiple contract placements that have got really, really good GP. But of course, they only last until the end of September. So this, of course, is because on Bullhorn right now, these contracts have an end date of September. And let's imagine this is all for a particular client, it's all a particular project. There is like a bit of a cliff edge because when that project finishes, Ahad's going to be going back to 2.5 per week GP. I don't think he's going to be happy about that because obviously it's a bit of a jump financially. But ultimately, this is the kind of thing that I like to use contracts out in period and weekly GP to get ahead of, because I want to know where my cliff edge is personally as a recruiter, but also then as a leader, where the cliff edge is for the business. Because of course, the name of the game is growing the contract book and making sure that, and for a healthy contract book growth, you need to be doing both extensions, ideally redeployments as well, more about those later, but crucially then new contract placements as well. Now let me show you, I'm going to hop into Slice and Dice. Slice and Dice is the ad hoc reporting tool that's part of Analytics Enterprise, where you can, it's basically like a pivot table, but you don't have to need to use pivot tables to make it work. So it's super simple, and I'll just show you as we build something out. So, okay, we've already established that looking at contract sales, the forward value rolled into when you create it is limited. It's got its purpose, but it's limited. Maybe you want to look at something like, you know, what GP, what GM or GP am I going to generate every month in this quarter? And you'd be forgiven for thinking that a good way to do that might be to use the same metric we had on one view, projected GP selected time frame. So if I go up here, I'm going to put it to the whole business, and I'm going to say this quarter. Now we're going to generate. And like everything in Slice and Dice, initially it always comes with your owner down the left-hand side, but for our purposes now, just to show you, I'm just going to drag and drop that out. So, okay, over this quarter, our projected GP is just over $1 million. Great, but actually I want to know how does that fall into different months? And I think it'd be very easy to go, oh, you know what I'll do? I'll use my KPI date month variable and drop that in there. But what happens is that it just goes a bit crazy. What it's doing is the KPI date month is intrinsically linked to when the contract was created. So what it's actually bringing back now is this contract was created in July 23. This one was in August 23. This one was in September 23. That's no good for us. So that doesn't actually help us. So you need to know about the specialist metrics which are designed to do this job much, much better. So I'm just going to clear my report and go back to my metrics to select. And I'm going to go for monthly contract invoice. So this only works in Slice and Dice and then in the small data grid on dashboards. It isn't useful for one view, or it doesn't trend well. This is its specific use case. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go back to my whole company view. And again, I'm going to go to this quarter. It will again give me my owners all down the left-hand side, but I want to get rid of those. So if you notice, initially, it's the exact same figure as projected contract GP, because it's the exact same contract information that's going in there. But the useful thing is that now you have got this special variable only available against this and one other metric, which I will show you, called simply month. And if you then pull that in, now it cuts it up based on the working month as opposed to the creation month, as the previous example did. So I can see that actually, you know, my May is looking pretty healthy, 360K, but, you know, my June, unsurprisingly, is going to fall off a little bit because probably I've got some finishers. So I need to make sure I'm getting on top of my extensions and adding my new contract deals to the system. These metrics work, you know, in the way as lots of other Slice and Dice reports do. So I can pivot in company if you want to look at, you know, the breakdown based on the different clients. You could, let's have a look actually of demo data. Oh no, so this is demo data, so everything's coming through as an original. But in theory, you could also say, show me which of this is like new business and show me which of this is extension business. You know, you can do it by owner if you know you want to get if you want to kind of get a view on what the projected GP for each of those months is for individual owners, rather than going onto each of their individual one view pages and looking at the projected GP metric. So it's really, really powerful. I mentioned there was one other metric where you can use this handy little month variable, because understandably, most businesses want to know not only what contract business are we going to invoice, but what perm business are we going to invoice, or what direct hire business for my American friends. So there is another metric in here called monthly direct hire or monthly perm invoice, depending on where you're based. And this also works with that little special variable. So now when I put this in, this is going to show me all my perm business based on start date. Now, if you're a business that doesn't invoice on start date and you've got it configured into analytics that we've got an invoice date as opposed to a start date, this is going to respect that. But for everyone else who invoices on start date, this is a metric that uses the start date of every deal to tell you which month it's falling into. Now, I don't know about you, but I actually don't like how it's configured there. So I would probably do something like that. So then I've got a nice little view of like what my total invoice is likely to be each of my months. And frankly, we really need to get some perm business for June because, you know, currently got a blank there. These metrics also work really nicely in dashboards. So I'm just going to jump into there as well. So dashboards is an enterprise analytics feature that is, the way I like to describe it is it's like it takes the best of all the different features and allows you to have them all on one page. So you don't need a slice and dice and a trend and an on point and a this. You can have everything in one place. So I'm just going to show you what you can, the kind of things you can build out in dashboards very easily. So if I go to new, and then I'm going to click my little edit toggle up here, and I'm going to go to add panel. Now there's lots of different panels here. I'm not going to go into all the details, but what I will say is I'm going to use small data grid. And even though I know you're not meant to have favorites, this is my favorite panel type because you can do by far the most in this panel, including really good visualizations, which is kind of the best thing about it, really. So let's click small data grid. I'm going to now show you a variation on that monthly contract invoice metric. There's another one called weekly contract invoice for businesses where you actually, you know, you want to look at your contract report over it weekly as opposed to monthly. So I'm going to put weekly contract invoice in. Let me just turn off this inherited settings. I'll go to this quarter. You could do it yearly, but of course, you know, if you're going to look at your yearly contract invoicing by week, you're going to have 52 lines, which is going to be quite busy. So I'm going to keep it to this quarter. Then we go to apply. And like slice and dice, initially, whenever you create one of these tables, it comes with your owner down the left-hand side. But in this example, we don't want owner. So I'm just going to untick owner and remove it from the row groups. And instead, what I want is another special variable that only works with this metric called week starting. If I drag that into my row groups, here you'll see I've got every one of the weeks starting as per the quarter that I'm looking at. And now, if I go to my visualizations, I've got a nice bar chart. This is demo data, so you know we haven't got like something really troubling that I can kind of point out is coming. I guess the only thing we could say is like the last week in June is less. Therefore, you know, obviously the overall trend is down, which is what you want to get ahead of. Let me give you another example. Again, I'm going to use my favorite, small data. And now I'm going to pick those two monthly versions, the monthly contract invoice and the monthly direct hire invoice. And this time, because obviously if I choose a year, I'm only going to have 12 columns, so it's a little bit more manageable. And I'm going to say, show me this for the year, and then apply. Just going to move my tile up here so I can see it a bit more easily. So again, initially it's come with my owner down the left-hand side, but that's not what I want for this view. I want to use that special month variable. And there are a lot of ones that sound similar, but it has to be just month. Nothing else is going to work, I'm afraid. I'm going to pop month in my row group. And now, when I go to my visualization, I've got a nice stacked bar chart. This orange is the perm, and the purple is the contract. And all I would say about this non-existent recruitment business is that the perm people really need to pick up the pace because they're slacking in comparison to our contract people who are clearly carrying most of the weight. So, right, I've got one other place to show you, or one other kind of set of contract metrics to show you. For this one, I'm actually going to pop into the on point feature. So on point is it's like a snapshot of multiple users or groups against any particular metrics over a point in time. So where it can be really useful is if you want to look at user activity. So you don't need, you know, if you're looking at user activity, on point is generally a little bit more visually interesting than say slice and dice. On point doesn't let you do anything like pivot clients in or pivot other variables in. So it has to just be based on if you're wanting to look at users and groups. But if that's what you want to do, this is a really, really nice place to do it. So I'm going to pick a few of the other contract metrics. We've got average contract deal, average margin, and average placement value. If I can find it. we are. So once you've popped your metrics in, you can go in and say, okay, do I want to see just a group? If I click on a group, I'll show you. You can have the choice just of adding the group, just of adding the users, or adding a combination of both, which tends to be what I'm going to do. In this example, I might actually just add the group to show you if you want to, do like, let's say this business, you want to do a report which shows you all the activity for California, Northeastern, Southeastern, Texas. This is a really great way of doing it because you can just chop and change which groups you want in your report. So for example, if I just click Northeast, I can now just manually add them as a line. I'll do the same with Southeast and Texas. What we'll do is we'll do Texas, or the group and all the users in the group as well. Oh, look, actually, it's quite a small group. I hope this has got some data in it, but let's give it a go. Let's do last 12 months to maybe try and catch as much as we can. Okay, here we go. Also, sadly, none of the users that I picked actually had any data there. So I'll just focus in on this Northeast result here. This is average margin. So, the percentage, the margin percentage for all the deals created in this time frame. I think this is a very good, healthy margin for contract. Do you know what? I think to give you a better indication, I'm gonna expand out and add in. So that's another thing that I love about OnPoint. You don't have to be like, all right, I choose this and then I have to start again from the beginning. If actually you want to add something else in later, you want to add a new metric, you want to add a ratio, you want to add a different user, you can just click and add them. So you're not like limited to, I can only do this group at a time. Okay, we got our friend Ahad again. So Ahad's average margin in this period is almost 26%. Pretty good, I'd say. And let me just draw your attention to the difference between the average deal contract and the average placement value contract. Now, the average deal is showing you the average. So a deal is his portion of the placement. So this is, let's say he's got loads of 50% commission splits. This is the value of those 50% commission splits. Whereas the placement value is the total value. So if we did a deal that was worth $10,000, 50-50 between myself and Kat, then in the average deal, we both have 5,000. But in the average placement value, we both have 10,000 because the overall deal value was 10,000. So these are really great things, I think, for management. I wouldn't necessarily recommend having them on people's OneView page because I'd rather encourage them to do newer deals. But these are really useful for management to maybe assess whether you've got certain groups, certain clients, certain regions that have the kind of business that you'd like to have more of. So, their margins are very good. They generally do placements that have got a high value. And then you can make leadership decisions on, right, okay, because of what we've learned about this set of customers, we are going to prioritize their jobs from now on. They seem to be, they're a high value customer. Okay, last thing on this, I'm going to go back to OneView. The last set of metrics that we have is what I would call our contractor health suite of metrics. These are, again, only available for enterprise. I'm afraid so, not on growth or starter. Let me actually collapse this panel because I think my main ones I want to draw your attention to are here. Actually, I'm going to go and look at someone else because great for Erica, she hasn't got anyone who's at risk or a potential problem. So let me go to the whole company view and then I can hopefully show you a bit more what these are capturing. Okay, so firstly, we've got finishers with no extension, CV, interview, placement, or engagement. So these are contractors due to finish this month based on their end date that's on the system. And these are contractors that you have made no attempt to place elsewhere. So they haven't been extended and they haven't had their CV sent or interviewed or placed or crucially had an automation engagement. So these are potentially contractors that are going to walk out the door. If you don't place them elsewhere, they're going to find their own opportunities and sadly likely to be with a competitor. And the metric on the right here, the weekly GP finishing, that's just the weekly GP value of said contractors that are walking out the door. Kind of brings it home, doesn't it? That by not trying to redeploy or at the very least extend your contractors, money walks off the table. One thing I haven't mentioned actually is that with all these metrics, of course, you can click in. So I can go in and I've got anything that's in highlighted in blue is now a link. So you can go straight back to the ATS to that record. So you can go straight back to the job, or probably in this case, I happen to know that it's over here. You can go straight back into the placement as well. So you could potentially call your candidate, hopefully extend them, or if they're not extended, figure out how you can place them elsewhere. Now, we recently added the engagement portion of this metric. So if you don't yet have in your system this metric that also says engagement, so it finishes just at placement, please contact support, because we've now got metrics that also take into account whether these candidates have had an automation engagement, because automation has such an amazing use case for contractors that are finishing. It's so easy for them to slip through the net, by recruiters, especially if you're encouraging your recruiters to write new deals and do their extensions. Contractors where that might not be happening, sometimes don't come to the forefront of their mind, but automation can catch those candidates. And if they confirm, no, I'm not renewing, of course, it gives you the opportunity to book in some time with them, to get an updated copy of their CV, to possibly do some business development by doing some lead gathering from them where else they've been interviewing. So, it's a really easy automation to set up that has the potential to give a nice return. Right. I'm going to have a sip of water after that. So next, let's talk about the options to try and get your gross margin metrics more closely aligned with reality. Now, big disclaimer here, everything in the ATS that flows through into analytics is a projection. It's all based on contractors working the time that you've put them in the system to work. So everything I'm talking about here is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be a substitute for what we would call actuals. So you only know how much time a contractor actually invoices at the end of the month or at the end of the week when they submit their timesheet. So we have got options within analytics for you to import your actuals. And I would say that even if you do so, I wouldn't recommend kind of changing all your contracts metrics to only be considering actuals. I still think there's a lot of value in encouraging those behaviors which bring in high value placements. But that is it can be something useful if you want to have both your actuals and your projected in the system. If you're a Bullhorn 1 client, we do have pay and bill analytics, where you can have all your actuals that automatically flow through into analytics. So you can do some really great comparative reporting between, actual gross margin versus projected gross margin. But how do we get that a little bit closer to reality? Because we know, we might sign a contract for 3 months, working 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, but there'll be the odd day off, there'll be a dentist appointment, there might be some vacation, we do have to let people go on those things. So what is actually invoiced, we know it's very unlikely to be exactly the same as was put on the system. So what can we do about that? Well, we've got a few options which are really low lift because they're just done on the analytics side, so it doesn't require you to do anything different. And the first one is what I would call a utilization rate. So a utilization rate, some people call it like a scaling factor, or can't think actually another word for it. Let's hope both of those mean something to you. So if I've got a contract that is a contractor that's, let's say they're contracted to work for 100 working days, probably on average, they might work more like 85 of those days. So 85% is a very common scaling factor that people put into their system, because that on a macro level, on like a company-wide level, then starts to bring your contract projections a little bit closer to reality. The pro is that it's easy because all you do is raise a support ticket with analytics. Once we've been told to put on a certain utilization rate, such as 80%, 85%, 90%, support can just make a quick change, and then every single metric on your system will update to reflect that, meaning contract sales, if you wrote a deal which would have been worth 10,000, now it will only be worth 8,500. Projected GP would have been 10,000 per week, it's now going to be £850 per week. So it's an all or nothing situation. You can't chop and change. It can't be different for different clients. It can't be different for different groups. It's either the entire analytics system or not at all. And that, I suppose, that's the con. The con is that it is that quite, it's quite, categorical. So whether that is right for your business, it's a really personal kind of decision, but many customers do that, and it helps their projections get closer to reality. The next option that's just on the analytics side is what I would call a working day cap. So this can be applied either on an all system level, so every single metric is updated to do it, or on a metric by metric level. So this has got a little bit more nuance that you can apply. You can choose to only have 1 or 2 metrics that work in this way. So a working day cap will mean that once a contract reaches the length that you say, you will no additional GP is going to flow in. So let's take an example. And we're thinking about contract sales again. Someone makes a fabulous deal that is for 3 years. So obviously that is going to end up being a huge amount of value in their contract sales metric. And if your staff might be incentivized or rewarded, or maybe invited to lunch club based on something like their contract sales metric, but that actually massively weighs it in the advantage of contract recruiters, especially say they're working with a new client who always gives these massive long contracts, but it feels like it's overly advantageous for for the people that are working with those businesses. A working day cap would stop the GP once they hit that cap. So even if you signed a contract for 3 years, if you had a working day cap of 100 working days, it would only ever bring in 100 days of GP. So it would just really reduce it down. Another reason people might use this is if you only pay commission, or only pay, say, full commission on contracts for, say, the first 6 months or the first 12 months, you may choose that once a contractor reaches a suitable working cap, so like a year's worth of work, no additional GM should flow into X, Y, and Z metric. So that's got a little bit more flexibility, but again, it's right in some cases, not in others. So that's another option that you've got. Next, we have got options which involve making some changes in your ATS, including capturing the payroll costs. So let me just jump into the ATS here. So if we're thinking about payroll costs, the first thing we need to consider is what are called burden rates. So let's think about, you have a corp to corp or, limited company contractor. There are no additional costs. What you pay them is all it costs you. Therefore, your margin is literally the difference between charge rate and pay rate. Perfect. However, you also might have contractors that you employ. So what you pay them versus what it costs you is not the same thing. So you've got additional payroll costs you need to capture. So Bullhorn has a functionality called burden rates, where you can say, actually, for all contractors of this type, we should reduce their margin percentage by a certain percentage. So, sorry, I didn't explain that very well. Let's think about someone who you're charging 600 USD a day for, and you're paying them 500 USD a day for. But actually, you've got some additional payroll costs in there. So the real cost to your business is 550. So if you don't use burden rates, what's going to happen is analytics is going to show your margin as being $100 per day. But if you use the burden rate feature, it will show it as being $50 per day. So there's probably lots of information about burden rates on all the hub and the launch content places that Bullhorn has. It's effectively linked to the employee type, and it's not a per placement setting. So, you can have, let's say, 3, 4, 5 different percentages, And then depending on the type of employee, you might give those percentages. You might have one for your in the UK, like PAYE contractors. You can't do it on a per placement basis. Like this contractor, I know this is their extra cost, therefore I'm going to put in a free text field 10% and it's going to figure it out. It has to be based on certain profiles that you set up. But again, that can start to get your projections closer to reality. Next, we have got, I'm going to choose a better job than genuine non-test case. I'm going to go into lollipop person. I don't know if you have those in the States, but those are like a person in the UK who holds like a great big sign for children at school crossing the road, and it looks like a lollipop. And it's a nightmare because every time I take my kids to school, they're like, can I have a lollipop now? You're like, no. Anywho, let me show you a set of fields on a contract placement that you can use to control the value. So, as we were saying initially, the main things we're looking at are start date and end date, pay rate and charge rate, and the unit. So once you have all those covered, your next kind of option for flexibility are these fields here. So this one, hours per day, and there's also one called, sorry, let me go back there, hours per day, and the system name for this field is also hours per day, very handily. And there's also a field called days guaranteed. That's the system name for the field, but I always rename it days per week because that actually is how it functions for analytics. So if you have these fields set up, what you can do is if you have a contract that's maybe is not a full-time contract, you can use these fields to, again, reduce the GM going into analytics. So let's say, you're paying contractors hourly and you've got your hours per day field set up. If you then reduce that to something like 6 as opposed to 8, it's going to pro-rata it. So again, make the GM more accurate. If you say only do placements in hourly units, you don't need your days per week field. Your hours per day field is going to do it all for you. If you only do contracts in daily units, you don't need your hours per day field. Your days per week field is going to do it all for you as well. But if, like most businesses, you have a bit of a mix between your hourly contractors and your daily contractors, and possibly even monthly contractors, you probably need both fields so that you can control the amount of money going in for different contractors based on their working patterns. So a common example I see is that you actually might have one contractor that's placed on 2 different customers at the same time. Now, if we weren't to take advantage of these fields, then that contractor would have 100% margin coming through on 2 placements at the same time. Now, that'd be great if they could actually work 100% of their time at 2 customers at the same time because, quid's in. But in reality, you really want to reduce it down to 50% each to more accurately reflect the reality of their work. And then, sorry, I'm almost done. Another option, something it's quite niche, but might resonate with some of you. So it's a common way of contractors working in fields like oil and gas, or sometimes in like the marine industry or the shipping industry, is that people don't go onto an oil rig and like spend 5 days working and then have 2 days off at the weekend on the oil rig. What they'll do is they'll have like 14 days solid on the oil rig and then have 14 days off. So we've got a functionality called rotations, which helps you to accurately reflect the GM when you've got those sort of working patterns. I won't go into massive detail, but if this is something you think, oh, actually, we've got loads of contractors who work like that. So maybe it's like 5 days on, 2 days off. Actually, that's a week. That'd be fine. We might have 10 days on, 5 days off, or it could be 20 days on, 20 days off, whatever it is. If you reach out to support, we can send you some more information on how rotations work and the different ways you can set them up in order to get your GM, again, closer to reality. And then my final point is, if none of those work because it's just too complicated, you've got different, costs per contractor. So having like a blanket percentage is not going to cut the mustard. Having different burden rates per employee type doesn't give you enough flexibility. You can add what I would call an adjusted pay rate. So instead of us going off this pay rate here, you'd have an extra field just saying adjusted pay rate or whatever you want to call it. And in that you'd put in, or potentially your back office people might put in, once your contract goes through the placement approval process, what the correct hourly number would be should the payroll cost be taken into account. So let's just imagine that in this example, my pay rate is 15, but my adjusted pay rate is like 17 because I actually have two units of payroll costs that I need to compensate for this particular contractor. The advantage there is that it's super flexible. Every single placement can be different. Plus, if you have a placement where there is no adjusted pay rate, it's just the pay rate. If you just leave the adjusted pay rate blank, it will just use the standard field. So we have what's called fallback logic. It only matters if you filled in the field. If you've left it blank, we just use like the normal field. The disadvantage, I guess, is that it is more complicated. It involves someone checking every time, every placement, and what the adjusted pay rate should be. So I think you've always got to strike a balance between accuracy. I mean, we're talking about projections anyway, so they're never actually going to be perfectly accurate. So you need to strike that balance between accurate enough, but also not difficult for your end user, because getting them to add it onto the system and having, you know, a reasonable amount of fields to fill in that 99% of the time fill in correctly, I think is probably much better than having something really, really complex that actually requires someone basically the whole time monitoring it to make sure people are doing it right. So that's just something like food for thought, just my 10 cents. Okay. In that case, I've actually finished talking. So I'm going to ask Kat whether we have any questions.
Yeah, we have a couple. So for that trend chart that you shared, we did have a question asking about the filters or how you set up that particular trend chart.
Sure. Well, luckily, seeing as I already made it earlier, I can show you in detail. So this is what's called an advanced trend as opposed to a standard trend. An advanced trend means you can have data groups. And so that sounds very fancy and technical, but it just basically means you can have different tabs that do different things. So if I go into this trend chart and just show you how it's been set up, you'll see here, I've got different data groups at the top. So all I've done is I've used the same parameters, so the same metric and the same time frame. And then I've just chosen a different user in each of my data groups. And that's it. This can be really useful. You know, you can do multiple time frames, you can do multiple groups, you could even do different clients or sets of clients and compare them using an advanced trend and data groups.
Excellent, thank you. And then we did have a question about, can you tell me a little bit more about tracking extensions?
Yes, quite a big topic, but I will try and kind of zoom through it. So there are two ways to track extensions. There is what's called a change request and what's called a copy placement. So a change request, and in fact, let me just get Bullhorn open. So a change request is someone coming in here and using this actions add change request. So when you add this, you're going to keep lots of the things the same. So the start date is always going to be the start date that originally happened, but you're going to change the end date. So the end date is now going to be your new end date. And crucially, you're going to add an extra field here. So it's the system name is called date effective, but I always rename it day one of extension because you can't make it only appear when you're doing an extension. You either have it on placements or you don't have it on placements, unfortunately. So if you leave this blank, that's going to be like the original, you know, the 15th of the 5th to, oh, I'm not even in the right year on this placement. Oh, hey ho. You can see that once, because I've removed that date, it's automatically populated with today's date. But once I removed it, you've got this little hint there that says only used for extension change requests. This is like the first day of the extension. And in analytics, it's going to kind of section your contract into two pieces. So you're going to have your original, which was the first start date to the end date. And then you can have an extension, which is day one of the extension to your new end date. rather than having them kind of cross over in the middle. So this is a really clean way of doing it. Again, if that's something people want to know more about, it's quite a big topic. So I recommend looking in Bullhorn Hub. If you just search for change request, there's all sorts of information about it, because the best way to set it up for you depends on a few things about your business. But those are the two most common ways of tracking extensions. And I'm a big believer in tracking extensions rather than just putting everything on as new business, because we want people to do real new business as well as do extensions. And that's a good way of actually being able to incentivize and even reward separately for new business versus extensions. So.
Excellent, thank you.